Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Benjamin Harrison, and the focus is foreign affairs and losses. The year is 1890. It's now a couple of years into Harrison's term in office, and it had been a productive couple of years, advancing the ball on veterans issues, the antitrust legislation that came out, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act trying to address the currency concerns, and the McKinley tariff, the highest protective tariff in American history, had come through under Harrison's signature, so very productive, but not very pleasing to the American electorate, who went to the polls in the midterm elections, and the Republicans lost badly. More than half their seats in the House were gone. The Democrats would have a majority going forward in the last couple of years of the term. That effectively meant the domestic agenda for Harrison was pretty much going to be dead in those second couple of terms, and he had some regrouping to do, some rethinking about his administration, so he decided to take another trip. He took a lot of trips as president, but none longer or broader than this one, 9,200 miles over 19 states. It's the longest trip to date by any American president in history, all the way out to California. Spent quite a bit of time in San Francisco. This was part vacation with family along, but also business. Gave a lot of speeches, close to 150 speeches, a lot from the back of his train. Small communities would come out. He'd say a few words. Not terribly substantive. This wasn't about the economy, about the currency or the tariff. These were mostly speeches on American patriotism and the greatness of the American experiment, sort of an homage to the founders. That was sort of the thematics for Benjamin Harrison on this trip. Democrats came back, and it was time to focus on what Harrison could focus on. Again, the domestic agenda likely wasn't going anywhere, so he was going to focus on foreign affairs. And for that, he had his Secretary of State. But James Blaine was actually having a really tough time. He lost his brother, his oldest son Walker, and his older daughter Alice in consecutive months. One after another passed away. A terrible time for Blaine. As Harrison said, Mr. Blaine seems to bear up with a fine courage, though at times when he is not engaged, his face is a very sad sight to look upon. And Blaine had his own health problems. These were long-standing, and it got worse. May 7th, now of 1891, and Blaine suffered an attack, a serious one, basically incapacitated him, had to go back to Maine, his home, where he would recuperate for the next several months. All of this meant that basically Benjamin Harrison was going to be his own Secretary of State, and he was busy, hands-on negotiating deals. In the McKinley tariff, one of the elements of this, of the high tariffs that were put in place, was another option, reciprocity. Bilateral free trade deals. If Harrison could negotiate those, which the McKinley tariff gave the executive the right to do, then actually the high tariffs would go away, and you'd have basically free trade between those two countries. And Harrison was busy on this, and he was focusing a lot on Europe, trying to get tighter economic agreements in place. 10 of these reciprocity agreements were negotiated. He also was able to negotiate an end to a decades-long ban of imports of pork products from the United States, which Europe had banned for a long time. That now went by the wayside, and those exports obviously went up tremendously almost immediately. And Harrison negotiated an agreement with the British and the Canadians to give the Americans the right to hunt seals in the Bering Sea off the coast of Alaska. Again, this had been a conflict for quite some time, so very productive in these negotiations for Harrison. The biggest issue, the biggest, most controversial issue for Harrison in foreign affairs took place in South America, and this had to do with the Chilean Civil War that was underway. Initially, the United States, Harrison took a neutral position on the Civil War, not taking sides, but did decide out of his own sense of caution to send some naval vessels into the waters, and that included the USS Baltimore. Well, at one point, Captain Winfield Schley of the Baltimore decided to give his sailors shore leave, and so on October the 16th of 1891 in the port city of Valparaiso, a number of his sailors went on shore. They decided to have a nice break, restaurant, bars, and all of a sudden they get into a shouting match, including with some locals and members of the Chilean Navy. Then it turned violent. In the end, 2 Americans were killed, 17 were wounded, and President Benjamin Harrison was outraged. Outraged that this would occur, and apparently involving members of the military of Chile. He was outraged. He said so. He wanted an apology. He wanted an indemnity for the people who had lost their lives or were injured. Well, negotiations started over this, but frankly, the Chileans initially weren't terribly inclined to negotiate very much, and Harrison wasn't backing down. Just a few weeks later, in his annual message to Congress, he said, if these just expectations decisions about the indemnity and the apology should be disappointed or further needless delay intervene, I will by special message bring this matter again to the attention of Congress for such action as may be necessary. As may be necessary. What actions were those? Well, perhaps a veiled threat. Harrison said, solve this problem or I'm coming back to Congress for more. Well, it didn't solve the problem. And Harris wasn't again backing down. Just a few weeks later, now in January 25th, 1892, he did come back to Congress with a special message in which he said, if the dignity as well as the prestige and influence of the United States are not to be wholly sacrificed, we must protect those who in foreign ports display the flag or wear the colors. He wasn't messing around. Ball in the court now of the Chileans. What were they going to do? They'd now been warned twice, very public ways, and this time they backed down. In fact, within 24 hours, they issued the apology to the Americans. They sent $75,000 in the form of the indemnity. So what do we learn from this 2.5-month showdown? Well, number one is don't mess with Benjamin Harrison. At least in this circumstance, it actually reminded a lot of people of his day as a colonel in the Union Army where he was leading his men in a righteous cause. In those times, he was sort of indefatigable. You weren't going to get him to back down. That was kind of the Benjamin Harrison that was on display here in the conflict with Chile. But the other thing that we learned was the importance of a modern military, particularly the United States Navy. Chester Arthur started this, then Grover Cleveland, now Benjamin Harrison, all continuing the modernization of the U.S. Navy, getting rid of those ships that were made of wood and transported through sail, now with iron and steel ships coming off the manufacturing line with steam power. Having those in place, full of armaments, ready to go, that sent a signal to the world. The United States is emerging as an economic power, as a military power, not one to be trifled with, and the investment in the Navy was already proving its worth without really having to fire a shot, as that was the incident in Chile eventually communicated, frankly, not only to the Americans, the South Americans, but to the world. 1892. This is an election year, and the question was, first of all, was Harrison even going to run for re-election? Because at the beginning of the year, he was very much distracted by something else, much more personal to him. His wife was sick. Carolyn Harrison had tuberculosis, and the prognosis was not good. Benjamin Harrison was constantly at the First Lady's side, trying to do whatever he could. In fact, they thought a change of scenery might do some good, so they went to Loon Lake in the Adirondack Mountains. Didn't really help. By May, Harrison was not optimistic. He wrote their daughter, Mamie, that his wife had not shown the improvement we had hoped. There seems to be no reason why she doesn't come right up except her nerves. It is hard to get her to brace up and take an interest in anything. This was not going well, and it was very much on Harrison's mind. Another pain in the neck that Harrison had to deal with along the election cycle, though, was James Blaine. His Secretary of State was slowly recovering, getting back his own health, and his supporters were pushing him to run again. 4 times in the past, his name had been in the mix for the presidential nomination. He got it once from the Republican Party. Other times, he was considered a strong candidate, never could win the big prize. And even though he had these tremendous health concerns, his supporters were pushing him, and he was not ruling out whether or not he was going to run for president. Well, Harrison had to make a decision, and Lewis Michener, one of his strong backers, one of his money men, was pushing him, pleading him, let me start campaigning, let me start raising money. And Harrison had been demurring over these first couple of months of 1892. Well, finally, just short of the convention, he made his decision, and he told his personal secretary, Elijah Halford, that no Harrison has ever retreated in the presence of a foe without giving battle, and so I am determined to stand and fight. Yes, he would run for re-election. But before he could face and fight the Republicans, he had to worry about just getting the nomination with his Democrats, who were meeting in convention, and there was a lot of buzz not only about Blaine. John Sherman was in the mix yet again. Seemed like he'd been running as long as Blaine had, trying to get the nomination. William McKinley was mentioned. Now, McKinley, who was the sponsor of the McKinley tariff, that high protective tariff, lost his congressional seat over that, but he had recently become the governor of Ohio, and he was a darling of the protectionists, perhaps even more so than Harrison. So a variety were in play, and you got to remember, a lot of the political class weren't happy with Harrison over his patronage decisions, and frankly, his commitment to civil service reform was not well regarded by many in the party, so there were some grudges there. So there was some concerns. Michener was the lead for Harrison at the convention. And when that convention got together in Minneapolis, he really actually took a look at things pretty hard, and he felt pretty confident. He thought the Blaine people had kind of overshot and didn't have as broad support as they anticipated, and they didn't think anyone was going to go with McKinley when they already had an incumbent president who was so clearly in favor of the high tariff. Well, in this case, Michener was right. It went to the vote. On the very first ballot, Harrison got the nomination. It was McKinley and Blaine in a distant second, far less than the majority, and so Harrison was renominated. He got a new vice president to go with him. And that was Whitelaw Reid from Ohio. He's a newspaper editor. An interesting thing they had in common, for the first time, a ticket for president and vice president from the same party went to the same college. They both had graduated from Miami University about 5 years apart. As far as the platform was concerned, no major changes here. High tariff, bimetallism, stricter immigration laws, pursue a canal across Central America. These were the common themes that Harrison had run for before, and now he's running again. And they were in clear contrast with the Democrats, who were going back to Grover Cleveland. So Cleveland has served as the 22nd president, lost to Harrison, who's now serving as the 23rd. Now they're going to run again to see who would serve as the 24th. And again, Cleveland was on the opposite side. He was for the gold standard, hard money, single currency only, and for the low tariff. And there was another man in the mix. There was the progressive candidate, an up-and-coming party, principally out west, where James Weaver, he had a different combination. He was pro-bimetallism, pro-silver, but he was for low tariffs. So you actually had three candidates with three different combinations. It was a relatively quiet campaign. Cleveland had never been much of a campaigner. Harrison was much more focused on his wife and her illness, and in fact, that was almost all that was on his mind, as her condition continued to fade to the point where October 25th, just 5 days after their 39th wedding anniversary and just a couple of weeks before his re-election prospects were going to go to the polls in November of 1892, Benjamin Harrison's wife died. Carrie Harrison finally lost her battle with tuberculosis, so really a somber mood. All campaigning stopped for the last couple of weeks. Personal loss for Harrison then became political loss, because he lost, and Grover Cleveland won this election pretty easily. He flipped a bunch of states that he had lost to Harrison the last time around, big states of New York, Wisconsin, Illinois, California, and even Harrison's Indiana all went into the Democratic column. Weaver, the progressive candidate, actually won 5 states, small states. He got 22 electoral votes, but really wasn't a factor. In the grand scheme of things, it was Cleveland 277 to Harrison 145 to 22 for Weaver, and Cleveland was going to be going back to the White House as the 24th president. Harrison, again, was really affected by his wife's loss. As one observer said, much afflicted, his eyes red from weeping and with dark rings under them told the tale of his deep distress and sleepless nights at the bedside of his wife. That was really his more emotional activities, was focused on that. He lost the election, but he wasn't done being president. In fact, he would have a busy lame duck session. That's the story for another day. That's Benjamin Harrison and Foreign Affairs and Losses from the Life of Benjamin Harrison. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.